Okay, I'll call to order this meeting of the Robinson School Building Committee for Tuesday, March 25th. And first, we will start with a moment for public comment. Okay, I don't see anyone on outside of members, so we will move on to minutes. There's actually two sets from March 18th. Thanks, Kathy, and a very brief document of minutes capturing our vote on the 22nd before town meeting. So any edits or feedback on the two meeting minutes? Or a motion? Am I muted?
No, you're not.
No.
We're all letting
motion.
somebody else do it.
Well done. Press a button.
So moved.
So Allison moved and a second, please.
Second.
Okay, I think I got Tom for that.
Yeah.
Okay, all in favor for approving March 18th and March 22nd meeting minutes? Chris,
Yes.
Kristen,
Yes.
John Cunningham?
Yes.
I'm an I. I don't see Kevin. I don't see Jeff, Stephen, Lindsay,
Yes.
Allison,
Yes.
Tom.
Yes on the most recent one, abstain on the other one since I wasn't there.
Okay, thank you. And Mike, I don't know if you plan on, if you're able to unmute.
Yep, I abstained because I wasn't there.
Okay, thanks.
I'm finally able to make one, so I'm here.
We're glad to have you, Mike.
Thank you.
And so let's move right on to annual town meeting reflections, review. Obviously, everybody knows now that that passed. Someone did the calculation of the vote, which is 84% approval, so that's great. And MSBA actually sees those numbers, correct? So they can take that as an indication of the community support, so that's great. You'll see in your email, I did attach the question and answer transcript from the discussion of Article 7, because I don't know if I like blacked out in the moment, but I just really wanted to be able to review that later. And I think it was helpful because I did pull out a couple areas where I think we could turn into a bit of a some updates for our frequently asked questions from areas that either we had already addressed but could clarify a little bit more. Did anyone have any thoughts after looking at that?
I'm glad that Diane had the observation about the other estimates coming from other towns.
Yeah, that was great. I
That was
joked with
just
her
very good
after
that
that.
she did that.
Yeah, that was great. Hey, Kevin, welcome. We're just talking about annual town meeting reflections and the transcript that's in your email. There was,
I like what you did and how you pulled out, the main points, like whether it was a question or a piece of positive influence.
thanks. Yeah, the transcript app that I used, like I said, was saying earlier, isn't um it's very like there was a little bit of formatting and punctuation and like word flow to fix, but I just wanted to capture the points that were made. So there's a list in my email that said of areas that I think I'd like to propose. I could make some updates to the frequently asked questions. Um, I don't think we have a specific question answering, is this plan focused solely on Robinson School? I know that it's obviously like this global question that we have embedded in all these other questions, but maybe just we can just call that out as a specific FAQ. Is there a chance we won't get the MSBA reimbursement grant? Again, something that I think we keep talking about, but could also just benefit to have specifically spelled out. Why is an OPM required? Does the school committee or does this committee have a preference on an outcome? Is there data on the advantages of elementary grade level configurations? That one's got a little bit of a hold on it in my mind. I don't know that would take a little bit of research, I think, and is not, doesn't have some urgency to it, right?
Valerie, I also
Yes.
think I personally, I think that the committee's opinion also will be answered in time. So I don't necessarily think that that's something that would be that we need to put in the frequently asked questions, because this committee will make a recommendation.
Okay,
And the next time we go for a vote, that will be clear.
great.
Are there
Okay.
any, I'd have to look back at the SMMA attachments in their feasibility assessment work, but I remember when they surveyed like the community about whether they were in support, parents were in support of a pre-K 2 or pre-K 5. If there's survey results that indicate one way or another, that maybe those are worth
We
sharing.
have all of that, Lindsay. I do think that it's now 3 to 4 years old, and so there are people who weren't even enrolled in the
That's a
schools
good
at the
point.
time that I think it warrants
Yeah.
those conversations happening again. But we do have that, which
Yeah.
led to us saying that there was interest to do this.
Yeah, I mean, just to show that it's not getting pulled out of thin air for folks who are maybe new to Westford or older generations that maybe weren't necessarily paying attention to that because it wasn't super focused on.
And when we went through this years ago, there's no research out there that
Okay.
shows that one configuration is better than another. Unfortunately, schools are built, and then based on the needs of those schools and the districts and the enrollment, it ends up being what it is. Like there are pre-K to 8 schools, there are K to 3 schools, there are pre-K and K. There's just a wide variety based on a number of different things.
Okay, thanks, that's helpful. I did remember that, thanks for reminding me that a group of administrators did look at that a couple years ago, so. And then the other one was, that I pulled out was, how would a future project impact the town's debt exclusion? So I'll just have to refresh my memory if that's already spoken on the FAQs. Kristen, you looked like you were gonna unmute.
Well, I think it really depends on what we do, right? So if it's a brand new building, it depends on the funding and the amount that it's going to be. We know we have to borrow for the full amount. We know that MSBA will likely participate in about 48%, but we really can't speak to that until we have the estimates from the designer, which we would know at the next phase. So if and when we go to town meeting next, we will definitely have that information, but we cannot prepare that information right now.
Yeah, I didn't hear the question necessarily as like, what is the impact to my tax bill in dollars? I heard it more as like, is someone looking at how this plays into the debt exclusion window? And
I think we had just a $30 million placeholder right now in our debt exclusion window, but we review that every 6 to 12 months to see where we're at.
okay, thanks. So I'll probably hold off on an FAQ for that too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel like it's dangerous to throw out a number that could be wildly different.
Right. And that's the point of this process. When I was rereading the transcript, there was a person who basically said, like, this is the work to find out the data to make the informed choice. So we can just keep reiterating that. Any other reactions from town meeting?
I think I'm really proud that we were way ahead of the 2/3 vote. I know there was some concern by members of the community of maybe we should just go and do this in a majority vote and use free cash, but I think that this shows the confidence in the town and will help us in the future. So I appreciate staying the course of the 2/3 vote, and I think that will be really powerful moving forward. And I appreciate all of your hard work in preparing for this. I know it was a very short timeline, and I think we got some good results to start that hopefully we can continue to build upon.
Great.
I
Thanks.
personally think the tours really impacted the voters. So just want to put that out there.
That really made or
Yeah,
made or break it. Make or break
Yeah.
I
it.
did see him. I did see him, and I think it impacted him.
Yeah, yeah.
That's great.
And I mean, again, we do know people watch the videos though. So I do think even though,
And these videos
These,
now, because this will just continue to be a catalog on WestfordCAT. So, okay, so let's move the bulk of the meeting to next steps. there was a link to a document, and I will share that since we do have members of the public. I want to make sure um, and I'll just, if that's okay, Lindsay, I'll just hand that
Yep.
right on over.
Yeah, sure, of course. So I put this together. I'm just gonna look at my other screen
Sure.
so I can scroll. To just organize next steps. There's a lot of links embedded in here if anyone wants to click on them and do some more deeper research on the MSBA process. But really, Dr. Chu, thanks for clarifying. We need to formally submit our votes and sign a feasibility study agreement as a next step to the MSBA by April 28th. Then, assuming that they don't have a longer process to confirm that we're on their agenda for the April 30th meeting, I'm hopeful that we would be on that meeting for them to then authorize us to formally enter the feasibility study on the agreement on their end. If not, if we don't make the April 30th meeting for some reason, then the next meeting, because they meet bi-monthly, is June 25th.
Can I just jump in there for a second just to let everybody know that this process is just taking the certified vote, sending that, both emailing it and then and snail mailing it to the MSBA, which we should be doing any day now. They also have an exhibit A, I think, that goes with the feasibility study, where we're sending that to them right now too, which has what the amount was. So the amount that was approved was the $1.6 million. So we send that to them, and then they're going to send back to us the feasibility study agreement with all of the numbers involved, with their percentage identified in that. And honestly, within the next few days, we should be able to have the individuals who are supposed to be signing that be able to sign that to get it back to them in preparation for that April 30th.
Perfect. That's great. And then from there, we would move into the module 2, which is just forming the project team ahead of the feasibility study kickoff. We could start putting together the request for services. There's an MSBA template. We could get that teed up and ready to go so that we can expedite the process following the April 30th meeting. I didn't double check, but I believe it has to get posted, and it's like it has to be out there for 4 weeks. But we can double check on the turnaround times. And I'm happy to work with, whoever typically posts those on the town side to draft or to tweak rather the template to serve our needs. I put these together in my professional life rather regularly. And then from there, we would hire the OPM through the MSBA OPM review panel process. And so we would receive proposals from OPM firms, evaluate them, and then we would have to formally go through the MSBA OPM review panel. They meet June 2nd or July 7th. I think those are the two dates that I've penciled in as potential dates that we would make for that formal meeting. And then from there, we do the same thing for an architect. Go through the MSBA's designer selection panel process to hire the architect. And I put the meeting dates that might line up with the overall process in at the bottom. And just one thing to note, that there's 13 appointed members on the designer selection panel within the MSBA, but there's 3 members from the local district that join. I think Kristen, Dr. Chu, and then a third would be relevant here. The third is somebody that's appointed by the school committee. And then we move into the feasibility study. The red is just rough timeline. I mean, honestly, until we get the OPM and the designer on board, validating these timelines, it's too early at this point to validate these timelines. We need to procure smaller consultants for a lot of the existing condition work, surveyor, traffic engineer, geotech, et cetera, identify that second site so that we're really able to map out a micro schedule, which the OPM will put together for us for the whole feasibility study. And then there's a couple different steps within the feasibility study that we work with the MSBA on, submitting a work plan and then a preliminary design program, preferred schematic report. Then we get approval to go into schematic design. The schematic design then runs its own process within the feasibility study. And then from that point, we get approval from the MSBA board to enter into a project scope and budget agreement. And that's where we would then go to the town to get approval for a project. My initial thoughts is making next year's March meeting maybe tight because of the durations that it takes up front to hire the two key project team members. So that's a high level. We can focus in on any parts that anyone wants to discuss.
That's great work, Lindsay. Thank you so much for getting this timeline started.
Appreciate that.
And I think that it's not
Kristen?
abnormal to have these types of projects on a special town meeting if you have to call for a special town meeting just because of the MSBA timing. So we shouldn't be afraid of that. We should just keep it in the forefront of our minds, though, based upon planning.
That's
Okay.
great.
Is one of the things that we kind of talked about before in terms of this next step when getting the paperwork ready to put out there for an OPM, is that something that we need to wait until the April 30th meeting to do, or we could actually start that process because we wouldn't be under any obligation to actually do it if for some reason the MSBA said, hey, they didn't like what we submitted, right?
Might be a question that we could just ask, I think Maria at MSBA, if
Yeah.
we're able to get started. I know, like internally, we could get started drafting it so that we're
Yeah.
ready as soon as, May 1st, we're able to just post it right up to the central register or wherever it has to go. And we're ready to go. But I would suspect we can't post it until we get through the MSBA's, until we have a signed.
Signed funding agreement, right?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was thinking in terms of we don't have to wait until for us to get
Yeah.
everything ready.
And Lindsay, just for to further explain that, so the meeting that chooses the OPM, is that the 13 members and the 3 members, or that's different?
No, that's different. That meeting is for the designer. Click on the MSBA OPM review panel meeting. That's the meeting that chooses the OPM. Scroll down a little bit right there.
This one. Okay, so that's June 2nd.
Yeah. I mean, they have a meeting in May. I will put in here, I got to double check the time frames. I mean, Kristen, you might know how long we need to have the ad out.
Yeah, we won't make that. I think we need at least 4 weeks
Yeah.
and then a review period as well. So I would lean on the side of caution on that one.
Yeah. So it
So-
might end up being July 7th.
So to your yeah, okay. Okay.
Okay, so the OPM, who's consisted of that committee?
So there's 2 different ones. So if you scroll up to the right under the module 2, yeah, there you go. We have to form an OPM selection committee internally where we then review
Got it.
we then review and then we go to the MSBA's OPM review panel with our selection. This is my understanding, with our selection, and then we get the formal, yes, you're good. You can sign the contract with them and move forward.
Perfect. Okay.
So I think we have more with my understanding, we have more leeway in selecting the OPM than the designer.
Right.
We can have, which is why they put 3 local people on the designer selection panel, but it's 3 out of 16. The MSBA has 13 members, but at least we have a representatives on that selection panel for the designer.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't see how we could make June 2nd then for the OPM, because if we can't post it until the first week of May, it has to be out there for 4 weeks.
I
Then
see. Then
have
you
to-
take like 10 days or 7 to 10 days to like review it, meet
and then go
a
to the
rubric or something. Okay. So close. It's like I feel like we're gonna be done, but then like wait for their July
Yeah.
meeting. Um,
Massachusetts general law.
I have a clarification, Lindsay.
Mhm.
What process do they start determining the method? Is that part of the design phase? When the designer's selected, they'll determine, okay, consolidation or what we need to do, or does it start with the Robinson? Where does that kind of fall into place?
Yeah. So we are going to want to put information into both the OPM, our request for services, when we high level information on our options, as well as the ad for the architect, but so that there's clarity on what we're studying in terms of the options, and they are able to then submit their proposals accordingly, including their fees. But not until we get into the feasibility study, technical feasibility study module 3, with the preliminary design program and the preferred schematic report, will those options be like flushed out and put onto paper. But there's just like so many iterative meetings and work and touch points with the OPM and the consultants, the engineers and the architects to develop those. But the district, the committee, us, as well as the school community and the school committee are heavily involved in putting together like space plans and programs and all of the components that go into the different options. And the MSBA has pretty strict guidelines of the requirements under the preliminary design program and the preferred schematic report. So it's like a big checklist of what we need to include.
So the reason I'm asking the question is the only consideration I'm thinking of is who we may want to select for the architect or designer may impact the scope of work we're trying to do. For example, an architect may be more specialized in renovation and may be a better selection than another contractor or should say designer that specializes in new construction for schools. It's the only reason I'm asking the question is just like in that process, where are we choosing someone? Because they're going to be the horse for the long term.
So Mike, I think
I would imagine.
if I'm remembering this correctly, you can have one designer for the feasibility study, and if you're not satisfied or you want to go in a different direction, you can choose a different designer for
Okay.
the next phase. So I don't think that
Okay.
we're
You're not
locked
locked
in.
in.
I think
Okay.
we want to choose the best designer for this feasibility study and
Okay.
then
That
make
answers
that
my
decision
question.
moving forward.
And I think,
Great.
I mean, candidly, we probably want a designer and a team of engineers that have experience with both so that we get the best inputs to get the best cost estimates. Because really, getting the best options and really being able to evaluate apples to apples options will be important from my perspective.
Yeah, great. Thank you
Mhm.
for the timeline, putting it in black and white, and just sharing your knowledge with that. It's almost like anticlimactic that these two lines, the preliminary design program and the preferred schematic report, are just like 2 bullet points because that's the work, right? Like it's that module 3, like all the sub bullets are, about choosing the OPM and making our little committee and then choosing a designer and making that committee and whatever. Like that's all drawn out, but really the bulk of the work you can't tell from this because of the lines. But that's really where, to Michael's point, like that's where we're going to figure out the consolidation and flush out those options. So,
Are we anticipating that this current group is the 13 for choosing the OPM, or are we considering new membership for making that decision? And should we decide that? Can we decide that sooner than later?
My understanding was that the 13 is the MSBA and then there's B3 from this committee. Is that correct?
Yeah.
so that's the designer selection, right? And then Kevin, in your
I'm talking
question,
about the OPM.
the OPM is we can just decide a selection committee. Do they have?
So our Robinson School Building Committee would receive the OPM request for proposal, information. we would review it, we'd score it based upon our rubric, we'd present our recommendation to MSBA, and then we would need MSBA to approve that. So that's for the OPM. And then after the OPM is selected, we then work with the OPM to develop a scope of services for the designer, go out to bid on that. And then my understanding is that the 13 MSBA board members plus 3 from the town of Westford would be reviewing and approving the designer.
I think to Kevin, if I'm hearing your question, I think the OPM selection could be all of us, or it could be a subcommittee of this group.
That is what I was asking.
And this is the group, because we're the ones who were appointed by the select board.
Right.
So unless someone can no longer serve on this committee, we're in it for the long haul. And so that would be, I think, yeah, it would be, Valerie, that would be something that we'd be discussing, whether it's all of us or whether it's a subgroup that is
Right.
the selection of.
And I guess the only thing I would add there, and I have a separate experience with like doing one of those rubrics and evaluating requests for services. It is pretty time intensive. So based on when we're looking at that, if someone's like, man, that doesn't work with my professional bandwidth this week or next week or whatever, or if someone just is overwhelmed by the idea of it, like we can down select from this committee for that.
Yeah.
Does that answer a little bit more, Kevin?
Yeah, it does. I'm in for the long haul. Sorry.
Great.
And a
Great.
question for Kristen, real quick. Sorry for another question
No,
here.
go ahead, Mike.
When we did the library, they obviously created these joint meetings between the PTBC and the library for all of these similar items, but I know we're through design really at that point. Is something similar happen, or is that really a choice where we decide to do joint meetings like that?
I have no idea.
So
Doesn't matter to me.
the library is a little bit of a different animal. So the library is controlled by the Mass Board of Library Commissioners. We also have a Board of Library Trustees, a permanent town building committee, and a select board. So for the library project, the joint committee, the Board of Library Trustees, Town of Westford, and the Permanent Town Building Committee, Town of Westford, is the de facto building committee for that
I
project.
see. Okay.
Per MSBA, the Town of Westford is required to create a Robinson School Building Committee that acts as the building committee. That is who we are today in this group meeting right
Understood.
now.
Okay.
That's super helpful because I was kind of wondering that too. Thank you. And that loop between that connection between the Permanent Town Building Committee is Tom and Mike's presence.
That is correct. Yes.
Go ahead, Tom. You looked like you were going to add something.
So in module 4, that would be the things that we use to send out for bids that we would when do we send out for bids? Is it before or after the after the town vote, I assume?
Generally, we can decide along the process. It's generally good to get the bids in to understand what the actual costs are before you go to town meeting and to the electors for voting.
Because that isn't how we did the library. But
Correct.
correct. But module 4, was the coming up with the schematics and the things that can be bid upon is in module 4.
Yes, we would have a good cost estimate by that point in time.
Yeah,
And that's why we might want different architects for module 3 and module 4.
we need the same architect for module 3 and module 4.
Oh, you do?
Sort of module 3 is this like where the bulk of the work is happening, gives us our options
Right.
and preliminary cost estimates on those options from a third-party cost estimator that the architect will carry as a subconsultant under them. We will then come up with our preferred option, and
Right.
that will then be that, and all of the work will be presented in order to then proceed into schematic design to get a little bit more detail on the design and get a better budget that then will be brought to the town for approval as the project going to the town for approval. from there, then we would proceed into the rest of design. There's a couple of other phases, and we would bid out and get hard numbers from a contractor, like just what just happened with the library at the end of design, which is module, I didn't put all the modules on here, module 6 or 7.
Yeah, and not to confuse things, but we could do what the library's doing is design, bid, build, or we could investigate, construction manager at risk, set a not to exceed price, and then have the general contractor on board and then begin. So that is a conversation for the summer with the designer and the OPM. But I just want to put a bug in people's ears that that method works very well, in my opinion.
I concur with that, Kristen.
But this was Mike's question a little bit earlier about the architect skill set for module 3 and module 4. Is in module 3, you want somebody who's more like, do we do renovation? Do we do new construction? In module 4, you're picking either renovation or new construction.
I think that's one of the reasons why the MSBA has the 13 people on the design selection team as they're looking at everybody, because they're also knowing that the only people they're even considering are people who they trust investing in.
Okay.
So we're not going to be, we won't be on our own evaluating that, but I think you're right.
Okay.
John?
Yeah, just as a point, on the library, when they got through the schematic design, which determined the scope and everything of the project, there was an inclination to just continue that schematic designer as the architect. And I think the town council really needed to complete the architect contract after that. It wasn't an automatic to have the developer of the schematic go forward and become the architect of record. So that's what happened at the library. So you just might want to keep that in mind.
Okay. Great. Simultaneously intimidating and exciting. I guess one question I would have for you, Lindsay, because I think this is so helpful for those of us who are not experts in this timeline. If you can speak, the question I'm hearing a little bit is, at what point in these steps is the outreach? So based on our discussion just now, it sounds like it would be that module 3 to say, here's path A, path B, path C. But I just want to be able to speak to that. And I think it would be great to bring this timeline or a version of it to the school committee at their next meeting too, to really just keep one for like a communication flow, but also that broader audience to let them know when they'll expect to hear not just hear more because we expect to give routine updates, but also when the engagement process will take place. Yeah, Chris?
I was just going to say, in my experience going through this in another district a number of years ago, it was during that feasibility study that we had multiple community meetings with focus groups talking about the educational adequacy, and very similar to what we did with our comprehensive facilities assessment, but now you're just looking at this. How do we address this identified problem? Do we go this route? Do we go that route? Do we go this route? And so there will be during that whole time period, whoever the folks we're working with, they would be conducting community meetings.
Yeah, I think it's between, I mean, I think it's all during module 3, depending on how we want to lay out the community meetings and focus groups and gather the input. But I think particularly between the bullets preliminary design program and preferred schematic report, because we have our program that we're establishing, and then we're trying to fit it into the options.
So from a super high level, from a resident that's, only paying attention a little bit, it's going to be like a quiet summer, but then they'll hear things in the fall. That's what, I guess that's a level. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, exactly. The summer is about building the project team, which takes time. So we have to follow all the steps, the procurement policy steps.
Okay.
That the Massachusetts general law outlines for
the
us.
OPM will help us write our scope for the designer, and we can guide them of how we want to do the public outreach and public feedback, and they'll also have suggestions for us as well.
Perfect. Great. It's just, for supporters or critics, this big vote happened, and then I just want to be able to say, this is when you kind of the community's next step is, right, to be engaged. Okay, so if we jump back to the top, we're getting the Exhibit A sent over to the MSBA. Kristen, do you have an update on the certified vote?
I corresponded with Kathy yesterday. I believe she was requesting that of Lori already. So I think that's in process. Kathy, do you have any updates?
Yes, it is, and Lori's working on it.
Okay, great. And then so the RFS, is that what? Is there, so it sounded like Lindsay, you were asking if there was someone in town staff who regularly does that you would volunteer to partner with, or does that make sense, Kristen? I don't know how any of this works. So if somebody in town staff needs to partner with Lindsay, or if she's able to draft something to bring to this committee on her own.
The request for the OPM documentation, is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should work with Mike Edwards, myself, and Jeff Goodwin on that because we understand, and I'm sure Lindsay understands this as well, but there's a lot of documentation. We also can pull from what we have done in the past for OPM selection. I know it's been a long time, but we don't need to start from scratch.
Okay.
That's what I was hoping. Perfect.
Great. Because I think that, to me, unless I'm missing things, would kind of dictate our meeting schedule for the next couple weeks, so that when you think you could have a draft to bring to this group, and for us to discuss and review that.
Would it be worthwhile to also check in with, is it Chelmsford who currently is a little bit ahead of us?
I mean, there's a number of communities. Yes, Chelmsford, they're in the feasibility study right now. There's a number of different communities that are on our same timeline and just a couple of months ahead of us as well.
And we should also check with Maria at MSBA. They probably have a template that we should start working on. So I would actually start with her first, and then back out of that.
There's actually, it's on the MSBA's website. I've linked it here. So
Okay, sorry, I missed
the
that.
template. No worries. I'll pasted a lot of information in here. So there is a template. I think it's just like this town specific stuff that goes in there is the stuff I wouldn't be able to input. So that's where I would rely on you, Kristen and Jeff and Mike. The project specific details I can start drafting up. But I think it's fairly straightforward.
Yep. And then we'll just have town council review it before it goes out as well. So we'll put them on notice.
Yeah. The MSBA gives us a lot of templates, which, is helpful. It's a lot of paperwork, but it's helpful.
Okay.
In terms of meeting schedule, Valerie, my question is, we know that the next thing that's going to happen is Kathy's sending the certification of the vote to Maria. We'll send it email. We'll send it snail mail. We've already submitted the Exhibit A. They're going to give us the feasibility study agreement. When I looked at that template, it looks to me that there is one signature on it. As a committee, they're not requesting that this committee vote someone to authorize. That's not anything in there. It doesn't say that anywhere in there, but I would not want us to find ourselves in a position where we weren't able to do something in a timely manner because we spread our meetings out. So that's kind of my question is, do we as a committee want to do something? Like I said, if you scroll all the way to the end, you're going to see room for one signature. And I don't know if it's going to be me, you, or Kristen, because this one, sometimes it'll say the chief operating officer. Sometimes it'll say the superintendent. Sometimes this one, it doesn't say that. So it might come back to us with their expectation. But I'm just curious if we need to, that would actually be the most pressing thing for us.
And maybe that's a question I can ask Maria, our contact at MSBA. Okay, so I'll take that action. John?
Oh, I was just going to say that most of the actions we've had with the Library Commission and others is they specify the owner, and usually the owner is represented by a town manager because the owner is the town And then from there, you go through that process. And I think the town manager usually signs those. They did in the case of the library, I know.
And I think that probably is going to be the case here too, John. The MSBA with the SOIs and a couple of other things that I've seen that we'll need to submit in the future, they tend to ask for 3 signatures. And because it's a school thing and sometimes it's regional schools, they tend to want my signature and Kristen's signature, and then sometimes a chair's signature. And now that the Robinson School Building Committee is an official group, that probably would be Valerie, but you're right. In this case, I imagine it's going to be Kristen. My concern is if the committee, if we think that we should be voting for someone, giving someone's permission to sign things, and we want that in our minutes, even though that's not something they're asking for, they do it some other times they have. There's been like we had to have a certified vote from the school committee and the select board to even submit the statement of interest in the first place. But they're not seeming to do that this time.
Well, I think the key is whether or not how they contract with the town. Because in the library, they use this standard contract form. If you've ever seen it, it's a nightmare. I don't know whoever signs those things, but they specify right up at the beginning who the applicant is. And usually they have definitions of who that applicant is. And in the case of the library, it was the owner, which was the select board. And then that was transferred over, and we authorized the town manager to carry forward with that. So just be careful. I mean, whatever our contract that we sign with MSBC is, it might be the key.
Okay.
Chris, are you suggesting that this committee vote to authorize you, Kristen, and Valerie to sign off on all MSBA documentation unless otherwise noted?
I don't think the committee
I
has
wouldn't recommend that, no.
I don't think the community has that authority.
Right.
We're an appointed committee, and you transfer, and whoever appointed you you start there.
Okay, so why don't we start by checking with Maria?
Yeah.
We have a template. I can send that to you, John, if you don't have it from the link from Lindsay's document. If you want to read that a little bit more carefully, I
I'd love to.
appreciate your experience reading those. And oh gosh, I lost my train of thought. So that's going to be the first timeline, the first deciding whether or not we meet for that. And if that's April 30th, we could just kind of have a check-in, like on April 8th. Does that kind of make sense?
Sounds good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, same time, same place. Yep. Lindsay.
I was just going to say, it might also be worth, like, I'm looking at the selection committee. If we do select a subcommittee, we could select it at that meeting. And it may be worth having like town council just review, because there's a lot of language in the process and require like guidelines about like providing proper documentation per local like requirements and approvals. So just like road mapping what we would need this committee to approve
Okay.
if and when might be helpful.
Okay. Maple review. Got it. Okay. That sounds great for immediate next steps. Why don't we touch, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Sorry, I don't know why I have to narrate that. Why don't we start by checking in on the second site? I know I think it was before. Yeah, why don't we just kind of get that on the record, please?
Yeah, so I've corresponded with our land use department. They're currently collaborating with GIS to put a selection list together. I don't have anything for this meeting.
Okay. Just want to keep asking the update and putting it in part of the record. Request for proposals. I'd like to chat about communication. I want to really make sure that we are thoughtful and methodical, I guess, about the communication from this group about this project to the community. I had some initial thoughts about like a recurring spot in the town manager newsletter, adding to our school committee updates, agendas, and was wondering if anyone else had thoughts. The Westford Cat has a physical newspaper that they've been sending out. So if we think something like meeting notes or like a brief progress report once a month makes sense. I don't know, maybe this is where like Lindsay or Allison, if you've seen something in other places work well. And then it does tie into like what the committee, like we either have to like delegate that authority or send it to the committee before we can kind of put that stamp on it. Or so I guess I'm opening up the discussion. Does anyone have any thoughts on communication?
I'm wondering if we could just do a monthly update for the general public, and then at school committee, um, that seems like an appropriate place to do an update more with more specifics. And I could do the same at the school level too.
I definitely think the idea of trying to keep the 84% of people who supported this process engaged so that there's no confusion that things that we're still talking about this and that we're giving people that information. So whether it's, I think what you're saying, Valerie, those touch points are great. What we're actually saying, that I'm not sure about. But I think the idea of having something that's going to the general population, whether that's in the newsletter or whether through WestfordCAT, I think would be helpful.
And when you compile all the thoughts, I'd be happy to talk with our communications consultant about their best practices on this as well. I know they've launched PR for large scale projects, maybe not a school building project, but a DPW building project, other initiatives to build out utilities, things like that. So we do pay them by the hour. So I just want to be cognizant of we won't consume their every hour with Robinson, but we want to make sure that we're using the appropriate communication methods at the appropriate time frames to keep people active. I think if we keep talking about it over and over and over again, it may get stale and people may turn it off. Again, I'm not a communications consultant, so they may know the appropriate timing of when we should be reaching out to our constituents.
I do think the idea of hopefully being able to have community engagement and community forums in the fall is great because doing it over the summer would be bad, and things getting a little quiet over the summer is okay because then as we're amping up for the start of school, we can be having that conversation. I just think it is making sure that we're staying connected with how we're getting the message out to everybody.
But you may want to do some communication fairly soon to say, hey, this is what's going to be going on over the summer. And because of what's going to be going on this summer, the next time you really will be hearing from us is in the fall.
I agree with that.
Yeah, me too. Set the tone and just be clear about, what the next steps are. And as long as the websites are up to date too, if anyone starts to think like, hey, I haven't heard about Robinson, like make sure it's just clear that we're working. You won't hear from us until the fall. We have some preliminary.
I think that was a really helpful discussion.
One small communication portion of the town, but I will continue to just leave in my newsletter at the top for updated information regarding the Robinson School Building project. Please see here is what I have, and it goes directly to the website. So
Okay, great. So Allison, do you think you'd mind taking a look at some, like suggesting some wording change updates to the website now that the vote is behind us?
Yeah, absolutely.
That'd be great. Thank you. What just happened? Oh, okay. So that was what I had on my list for next steps. And perfectly kind of coming up on the hour. Anyone would like to add anything or something that was missed? Okay, so we'll plan for April 8th, 12 o'clock virtual for our next meeting. Thanks for joining us. And I guess I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Kevin. And a second?
Aye.
Great. Okay, and all in favor of adjourning?
All right. Thank you.
Take
Aye.
care. Have a great
Bye.
afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye,
I
everybody.
don't-